Sorry to think. Dude, that was quite the view up there.
Yeah, that was really majestic, you know.
Inspiring moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's good to think about God and everything.
So bad.
So we've kind of covered the scenarios if God. Well, I don't know if we've covered all the scenarios if God didn't exist, but I'm sure we can go deeper into that. But let's look at the other side. So what if God did exist? Like, what are we, what are we looking at? What are we talking about?
Well, it's the more challenging, but of course more richer part to dive into. But understanding another premise, the way I've already made the first premises, understanding another premise would be that God in of himself, if he did exist, he would exist, and this is not something people think about a lot, but he would exist outside of religion. A lot of the understandings that we have of God and a lot of qualities that we know of God and a lot of sometimes arguments trying to disprove the existence of God is very related to theology and religious text. So if we were to remove that out of the equation and actually see God by the standard of himself, we can actually understand and find more things that we haven't discovered before. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind, that he exists outside of religion. And as to the plea for science to prove or disprove the existence of God, this is already, though it's maybe a very interesting statement to make, science has to prove there's a God or disprove that there's a God, it's not very accurate because it's not following on the premise that God is beyond a thing. Science is good for proving or disproving or quantifying the quantifiable things. To understand a reality that we have never partaken of or discovered, we usually find things of equal or more value to compare it with in relation to things of its level. But by that standard, God has no equal. If science could prove or disprove the existence of God through the quantifiable measures, he wouldn't be God. That wouldn't be God, were it to be energies or protons or whatever, any claim that we've probably made. So already that kind of puts those types of assumptions aside.
So one question I think that comes up a lot is if we think of God, we think of God being the creator of everything, then who created God? How did God come into existence?
Yeah. Again, it goes to the aspect of what and who God is. Because we know that things are in need of a beginning. Things have a beginning and a middle part and an end. And the coming into being, that aspect, that nature, that reality of coming into being is related to the reality of being confined. Having a beginning, being confined within time and space, within limitation. And still, that is a quality that is for things. The aspect of being created is rather a result of God and not a characteristic of God. We know that if we imagine a carpenter, for example, the carpenter has the ability to create a chair, the chair that we are sitting on. Now, though the abilities and qualities of the carpenter was there to create the chair, and his skill and his finesse can be seen in the quality of the chair and the art, and that doesn't mean that he is part of the chair. Mm-hmm. But that chair still needed an external force to start it, if you understand what I mean. So it's that kind of what is the characteristic of that type of entity. Not all things have the same characteristics, nor the same mode of existence. Mm. I think we could also say that God is, if we're going to base on the things that we all agree on and that his qualities, one of those qualities would be self-sustaining. A self-sustaining entity, that's probably the best term you can use for him, which has no self-contained and self-sustaining, has no beginning nor an end, not afflicted or affected by time or conditions of the material world. Even the belief in him would not tax him or gain him. Mm. So rather it's that idea that it's out of influence. Mm.
I don't know if you've ever heard this saying, but maybe you've come across it. If God can create a mountain big enough that he himself cannot move it.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of
it before? Yeah, that's, It's actually fun to just be in that question because you start going back and back and back and back and forth. So it's kind of like a rock and a hard place kind of thing. And at first, it's very counterintuitive. It's like, what? But this is what a question that we feel falls into something called the category mistake. And that is kind of a bit like what we've been mentioning. It's the idea that we have taken the category of God and put him in a category of, again, things. Because our idea of how God influences things and is being influenced is not correct. Again, it's the idea that God cannot be influenced. So the idea that when he creates something, how again it then works on him is not really a realistic relationship. God's qualities or virtues of creating, of power, of all-knowing abilities is not the way we understand it. And even further than that, it becomes a change of definition. Our definition of God becomes morphed because we're asking such a question. The definition of God that we use changes from being the philosophical definition of God, which is an entity that is disconnected and uninfluenced by everything else, and a definition that we find in religion and theology, where his characteristics and virtues and abilities are given to us to understand in perspective of time, ability, need, law. So we take those definitions that we have of him and we kind of clothe God, the lamp, again, we clothe it with our understanding of it, which is imperfect. And we kind of take that definition of understanding that we have kind of pieced together and we put it against problems like, if you could create this, So it's funny and it's something to think about, but it crosses that threshold of, relevant relationship. And so it's a change of definition and it's also a change of category. So what happens is we get then a paradox from the theological understanding, from the imperfect understanding, and a paradox from the philosophical understanding of God. And this is what we call a non sequitur, means the conclusion doesn't follow from the first premise. Therefore, it becomes a bit illogical to the mind.
So can you maybe give an example of how this would apply to?
A good example would be, for example, the first premise is a statement, a hypothesis. God is love. And then to follow that up, we have a second premise. God cannot be absent of any virtue. And then the third premise would be hate is the absence of love. And then the conclusion would be God cannot hate. So this is a premises following to a necessary conclusion as we define the rational, logical process of thought.
So when you think about religions and the way that every religion depicts God in different ways, would this then be wrong?
Yeah, it goes into also the function of something. It's the idea that, religion doesn't give you an image. Religion gives you qualities. And again, as mentioned, proportionate to what we need to understand. And because our understanding varies so much, and because there's such a great difference in culture and language, that very fact that you take a truth, it's almost like the whispering game. You take a truth, you take a reality, and you give it to people. Automatically, over time, the aspect of it will change a bit. There will always be parts of it that, becomes dogmas or superstition. But we need to also understand that the certain images given about God to us is proportionate to also what we need to understand. If you go to a subway, for example, and you're looking for different routes to different places, that map will give you that answer. But you can't use that same map to understand what's happening above surface if you want to find restaurants. So it's because of the need and because of the quality of what is being given, these things based on perspective and needs are going to change. And if you want to take the general picture of God as well, you have basically something mapped out on a sphere, and you want to, fold it out into a map. You will have to ruin its form. It will have to tear a bit. You have to tear the corners, and you have to change some proportions, and things always get ruined and lost in translation. And there's the barrier of language. There's the barrier of culture. There's the barrier of understanding. There's the barrier of he say, she say. There's the barrier of the fact that not everyone could read. There's the fact that not everyone understood things in certain contexts. So all these things has to be taken into account and understand that things need to be seen in perspective. That doesn't necessarily reflect on the legitimacy of God, but rather, ourselves and our understandings and contexts and stuff like that.
So what does that term? So what does that mean in terms of his existence?
No, it would going in the same line as what we've been mentioning of illustration. It's another example would be like the atom of Bohr. That illustration has changed. That imagery has changed throughout time based on our increased understanding, and that atom that we have, or that illustration that we have, is to convey function, not actuality. So to understand that also in perspective is important, especially when it comes to language. If you want to take the word existence as well, the term that God's an entity is still wrong. That's a noun. The language is still ruining it. To exist is to be confined in limited space, coming into being. So yeah, God doesn't exist in that sense. So even the term, even the reality of his being that we try to connect to him, existence is wrong. And everything that comes with existence is rather a result of him. So we think of it as stacked up realities, rather his is on a completely different line of. And one of the reasons I think is because when we talk about God or the spiritual world or life after, it's always in context of death. We never consider the higher realities or the different realities unless we talk about life after death or dying. But if this world were to exist, he would even exist outside of that world. He's still not contained. So if we maybe look at it as another form and level of existence, you have scientists that can maybe word it better than I can, and that's one thing we could come back to later as well, is the different levels of existence. It's not irrational to assume that that world that is unmaterial belongs to another level of existence where things are beyond material. So it's kind of also, in a funny way, answers the question, why can't God be a pink elephant? That a lot of people have heard also say. That is still a shape and form.
Is that why he can be a pink elephant?
He can do whatever he wants, but that is still something that we have created and understand based on frame of reference and many things. Yeah. And still that is a form. There is no form. It's not a he or a she. It's not an it. So
basically anything we can imagine is always going to be a form.
It's always going to be a form. And we can't really imagine anything outside of a form. It's like asking you to think of a color you've never seen, basically. So
I got one.
Okay. Convey it now. And that's the trick.
It's blurple.
A blurple elephant, yeah. Blurple. So it's that aspect also that we should consider into building our premises later, that we'll get to.
So why don't we summarize the whole thing, because we've gone through a lot of different topics and habits and
You've been confusing me.
I've been confusing you.
You've been talking way too much. I'm losing my thread. No,
I
it's
tend to do that.
Tangents. No. All right. So we came to the idea that we need to prepare our tools, before we go into this journey. So we said
it with the right habit.
Right. So the right habits we need. So we said philosophical habits. The aspect of diving into realities, putting it apart. The qualities we need to have: humility. We need to have understanding. We need to be discerning. Right. And we need to define our terms. We need to define our words. We need to understand the levels of knowledge that we have. Not try and stick to one thing. And then we try to define the image of God, the imagery. We see that there is a connection. There is a fundamental reality on all the images of God. This spiritual reality, the higher realities. And we see that in his qualities specifically. He's the creating force. He is the omnipotent force. He's the all-knowing force. So by really gathering these qualities and seeing it in comparison to the sciences and understandings of certain terms that we have, we see that it's possible, it's rational, it can fit. So the next step would now be to conclude, all things being, in place and equal, the belief in God is rational. It is rational based on need. It is rational based on observation, which we'll also go deeper into now. And it's rational based on, it doesn't go against any known fact or reality. It can be coupled. And we will try and really test this now in the higher forms of reality and see if that's really true.
So it can be understood.
It can be understood rationally. And let's expand it as much as we can, and let's see actually where we get. Excellent. Let's give it a go.
So let's go for it.
All right. If we observe using the lower forms of intelligence, observation, the material world around us, we see that everything is in perfect organization, in the sense that you have the planets moving around its sun, you have the stars in its place, you have every force obeying a symphony of its nature. And it does this. You have the sun radiating, you have the humidity of water, you have the burning of fire. And these things do it without will or intelligence. They do, with no volition.
It's in their nature.
It's in their nature. And I use the term nature, if you want to be careful to really define, in two ways. The first way is nature as in everything. Everything in existence working with each other. And the second term of nature is the qualities of that individual thing. The nature of fire is to burn, in that sense. We see also another rule that is almost unbreakable, and that is, as far as we know, everything has a beginning and everything has an end. Everything is contingent. That means whether it's 24 hours of life or 24,000 years of life or 24 million years of life, there is a beginning and an end. And by understanding these core aspects, we can then move on to a next premise. An atheist or a materialist would claim that all things in existence is in this rule because it's in the captive of nature. It's captive of nature, and nature rules these things. Now, if we were to go into these two aspects, all right, is nature and everything in it ruled by itself, basically, or is it ruled by an omnipotent reality? The first thing we can do, and a very interesting way of going to this, is the lower form of knowledge. If we look at the vegetable kingdom, the mineral kingdom, and the animal kingdom, and take it step by step, we can maybe get to a clearer conclusion. As mentioned, fire burns without will or volition or intelligence. Water flows without will or intelligence. And we see that minerals in their affinities exist on the level that they exist. Through processes, they come to be. But that's basically it. Its nature is to be. The higher form, which is the vegetable kingdom, has great variety as well. But they possess qualities that don't exist in the mineral kingdom. They possess the qualities of the mineral kingdom and more. That is growth. Growth and sensory to a degree, reacting to its surroundings and many other types of processes. But still, it does this without will or volition. It just is. The nature aspect of that. Beyond this higher kingdom is the animal kingdom, which we are said to be a part of. And in this animal kingdom, it possesses the qualities of the vegetable kingdom and the mineral kingdom. But it also possesses other perfections that don't exist in those kingdoms. The ability to move, the ability to interact, the ability to be intelligent and have will to the degree where it's beyond reality of the vegetable kingdom. But still that intelligence that animals possess, still that intelligence and will that they supposedly possess, is confined to instinct. Animals would never, through volition, go against instincts. But certain instincts will be triggered in certain circumstances that may seem unnatural to the eye. It could be a lion taking care of a gazelle cub, but that is an instinct nonetheless. It's not a conscious choice to protect whatever innocence it believes it possesses. Therefore, you cannot say an animal is immoral. It does, But then we reach this stage of where we observe man. And man possesses all of these things. It possesses what the animals possess, it possesses what the vegetable kingdom possesses, and it possesses what the mineral kingdom possesses, to the degree where we have those things in us. But there are two things man has that does not exist in nature. The two perfections of intelligence and free will. That's conscious intelligence and conscious free will, volition. Now, these two characteristics make us distinct. So, we look at man. We do what we said was Aristotle did, and that is we dip man in this generic term. And man is a rational animal, yes, but man also has conscious knowledge and volition. And these qualities that we have set us apart. Now, the conversation is whether these qualities are of a supernatural source or still through the progress of evolution. Now, if we look at it on a very different perspective, let's go back to evolution. Evolution is a process. It's not a force. A process that happens in need of organisms. And this process is slow and continuous. But evolution, nonetheless, could be seen as a tree, part of a tree. If nature is the tree, and the branches is everything that is part of nature in the bigger term, and we do not find free will or conscious knowledge anywhere in nature but in man, we are technically claiming that there are faculties in a branch that don't exist in the root. We are claiming that a drop of water could have things in it that the ocean doesn't. So, looking back at this again, there is a term used, a term called the microcosm and the macrocosm. The macrocosm is the universe and everything that makes up the universe. And the microcosm is the things in the universe. Another good example to really make it clearer is the tree and the seed. The tree is the macrocosm and the seed is the microcosm. The potentials, the hidden latent potentials in the seed are fixed. A redwood seed is a redwood tree. It wouldn't sprout and be a rose. A fox becomes a fox, as we mentioned, and wouldn't become anything else. So in this microcosm that is man, the expression of our abilities in nature have to be the degree and the level of reality that is the potential of nature. To say that man, who has volition and control over nature, there is distance, we create telephone lines, we create planes to overcome it. There is disease, we find medicines. There is the hidden fleeting aspect of electricity that we capture. Basically, man has control over nature in a way that all its hidden secrets we can find and discern through the faculty of seeing the visible from the invisible. So, to claim that nature can create something, if nature, everything, is to a standard, a power that it can control, to claim that it can produce something far greater than itself is to almost state that a painter or a sculptor could create a piece of work, an art, that is more perfect than itself. It needs to have all the perfections in order to create. If the painting of the sculpture could have all the perfections of its creator, it would create itself. Mm-hmm. So the fact that there are supernatural, not many people like that term for obvious reasons, faculties that exist in man that set us apart on a level that cannot be given to us by something that we control is very hard to process. But then food for thought becomes, again, we're being a bit biased and prejudiced because it's supernatural. If you look at the plant's perspective or an animal's perspective, the things that you can achieve, or I can achieve, or Einstein achieved, or even an 8-year-old can achieve, in comparison to an animal and a plant, is supernatural. But things are always supernatural until we figure out ways of understanding it better.
So basically you're talking about supernatural qualities that the soul would have, no? Or that human beings would have, no?
Yeah, I know a lot of people cringe at that word, that a soul or spirit.
That supernatural or
supernatural?
Soul?
Both.
Yeah. So, but I guess it makes sense what you're saying, that because it's outside of nature, it's outside of the confines of our instincts in a way. But then how would this aspect, like understanding this aspect of human capacity, if you want to say, if you want to call it that, how would that prove the existence of God? Could it just be that we ourselves have that capacity?
Yeah. So it's very easy to conclude if, again, because what we've done is we've really gone into the imagination aspect and the belief aspect and observation aspect. And if one would stop there, as you would with any other form of thought, it would be as if we are God. We are conscious, and there's a lot of things that they're even seeing in science. Our general collective consciousness is what forms and creates, you know?
And this is the theory that a lot of people also have. You know,
which is legitimate.
Which is, in a way, it has a truth to it.
It has
as well.
a truth to it, but not the whole truth, obviously, because we can always...
none of us have the whole truth. I guess.
Well, let me show you. I got...
Wait, this... Mine's dead? Okay, so we'll just have to finish with this one. Okay.
Well, I have the whole truth. I just have to...
Oh, you have it? Oh, man, finally somebody who has the whole truth.
No, so one way to do this is to look at another premise, where those premises are kind of set. You know, let's go with it. And that is, things are often known by their opposites. And if we make clear first that even though man does have this dominion over nature and these faculties that don't exist in nature and not necessarily are a result of evolution, you know, as evolution still is a process of nature, we see that man is still imperfect. The material world is imperfect. The fact that it's contingent. Man gets sick. Man is ignorant. Man is unspiritual, lacking in virtue. Man has a beginning and an end. And all these imperfections that add up, let's put that on the side. We look into nature's imperfections. We see that things in its opposites we have darkness, we have disease, we have cold, for example. And these things are the absence of something. Darkness is the absence of photons, it's the absence of light. Cold is the absence of heat. Sickness is the absence of health. Ignorance is the absence of knowledge, and so forth and so forth. And by knowing things based on the complementary realities, if there were no such thing like sickness, we would not know of it. We would not know health. If there was no such thing like knowledge, we would not know ignorance. The very fact we know of the imperfect points to a perfect. The very fact we know of the contingent points to the uncontingent. The very fact that we know of limited free will, because we cannot will anything to happen all the time. You might want something, but that doesn't necessarily mean you get it. You might create, but that doesn't mean what you create is perfect. So these complementary point to reality, a form. There's the material reality. So it points to a form of the uncontingent. So that means there must be something that is perfect. That means there must be something that is all-knowing, a source. That means there must be something that is volitional. For a creator of something with will and volition cannot be void of it in himself. So the culmination of all these things points to a deity, a conscious intellectual source of all virtue and of all things. And through this rational process of premises, we can conclude, still rationally, that there is a God. It does not negate the laws of physics. It does not negate the reality we understand it to be. It does not negate the human faculties. It merely issues a reality where we understand that there are levels beyond just this contingent world, which we can all feel and suspect, I believe, to a degree. So, from this perspective, I personally, and I know many can, conclude that there is a very, 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 very high chance that there is a God. A lot of people say that we can never know. Agnostics, we will never know. But I believe that's wrong. I believe we can know. To know something doesn't mean to understand it fully.
Yeah.
But you know. And then there's the process of going from knowing to understanding to a degree, from understanding to belief, from belief to certitude. It's still a process. And then there's the relationship you have to create with this higher reality that you have to. If it's a higher form of reality and life, it needs to be maintained, it needs to be nourished. And then this connection, and then this deepening, and so it's a whole process that a lot of people and a lot of us have to start, the moral aspect, the discovery of our higher nobility or of our given purpose. And it's beautiful to me. It doesn't remove the value of anything that we have, it adds to it. So I think it sounds good.
Yeah. So it seems like in conclusion, we're saying that on one hand, science and religion, or science and the existence of God, because a lot of times we maybe use the word religion and think of certain things, but science and the existence of God are not necessarily two things that cannot coexist.
Mm.
No, that one actually might feed
Right.
very well into the other. It sounds like that's on one hand what you're saying, and then on the other hand, that just because we cannot fully, to even approach the topic of God, we have to admit that we will never understand it fully,
Right.
but that there are aspects of this that can enrich our understanding of life, our understanding of ourselves,
Right.
and maybe even our purpose, and help us reorient in terms of what our
Right.
purpose
And our
is in this
actions
life.
Because really, no form of belief is truly a belief unless it translates into action. And this is relevant to religion, this is relevant to science, this is relevant to everything. If that belief does not translate to productive action, it's not belief. It's an idea, maybe a conviction to a degree.
Maybe that would be a great topic for a next
Hopefully,
session.
hopefully, if I haven't spoken too much, shut your brain down.
For me, no. I have a great thing. I can sleep with my eyes open. So, I mean, this is a lot of philosophy and a lot of philosophical terms, and some people might think, okay, what does this have to do with me, or how does this affect my life?
Yeah.
So, what would you think?
Yeah, and that's fully understandable, because you can never believe fully in God if you only use the rational. There are parts of the spiritual reality that are seemingly irrational. So you need to move from that as well. And another thing is, it doesn't matter if it does not change the course of action for the better. I think the knowledge, especially for youth nowadays, the knowledge of a nobler reality, the knowledge of one's immortal self, that every action has an influence. Every positive action has an influence, every negative action has an influence. It has been that because God is there doesn't necessarily mean that He'll take care of everything, but it also means that we are equipped. And to also understand the fact that it should all translate to a positive development. The true religious spiritual action is the action that can lead to progress. If a religion or a thought process or an ideology does not lead to this, it's more religious to not be religious. So I think as long as people can accept and understand and really feel lightened by the fact that there is this way of thinking, expand their consciousness to the point where they can go, wow, with each other as well, no judgment, no prejudice, and conversations and things can, move forward from what it has become today. I think it's successful.